Mrs Thatcher is back for a record third term as Prime Minister.
Where there is error, may we bring truth. Where there is doubt, may we bring faith. And where there is despair, may we bring hope.
John Major has defied the pollsters and led the Conservatives to victory.
4 consecutive victories hasn't been done since the beginning of the last century.
So many people in our country, they deserve better than they got on the 9th of April 1992.
We regret to have to report the death of the Right Honourable John Smith QC.
Parties that do not change die. Our party, New Labour. Our mission, New Britain. New Labour, New Britain.
There it is, 10 o'clock, and we say Tony Blair is to be Prime Minister and a landslide is likely.
New dawn has broken, has it not? We have been elected as New Labour and we will govern as New Labour.
Another Labour landslide.
The first leader in the Labour Party's 100 years to lead them to a second full term.
It's a pretty devastating rout for the Tory party.
This party has got to look and feel and talk and sound like a completely different organisation. You, Labour, you are the ones who have done it to this society. Don't you dare lecture us on poverty. You have failed, and it falls to the modern Conservative Party to help the poorest in our country today.
Hello, and welcome to my dissertation presentation. The title, of course, is How British Political Leaders Use Conference Speeches to Reposition Parties for Electoral Victory Following Successive Defeats. Strategy and the Role of Rhetoric. So, why did I choose this area? Well, I've always been really interested in communication, and I think that comes from being dyslexic at school, when I didn't have much academic success early on unless I was giving a speech or a presentation. And then naturally, any other subject or any other job role I've done since then, I've always sought out that communication part of it. So when I came on to study politics, the things that grabbed me were the speeches, the campaigns, the slogans. But studying these, you realise that speeches and slogans and campaigns, they're nothing without strategy. As Alistair Campbell says, it's strategy first, last and always. So I wanted to study communication, I wanted to study campaigns, and I wanted to study strategy. And where do the three of those meet? The conference speech. It's the biggest event of the year for a new, fresh leader looking to set their party strategy, or for a poised would-be Prime Minister battling on through until the election. So today I'm going to take you through my structure and each different part of my dissertation, and then I'm going to explain how I'm conducting my research, both in my rhetorical analysis and my interview. But first, an update on my progress, and I'm currently halfway through writing my New Labour chapter, having done the strategy and the background. I'm yet to finish my rhetorical analysis for 94 and 96, but I have started both. I'll then move on to my David Cameron and Keir Starmer chapters before doing my introduction. So, what's it going to look like? Well, this is my structure. I'm going to have an introduction, 2 case studies, a third case study that I'm calling Looking Forward, and then a conclusion. And I'm going to talk about each of these individually, but I'm just going to start now with the introduction. So in this section, I'm going to introduce strategy, introduce rhetoric, and introduce my 3 case studies. In the strategy part, I'm going to talk about all the books that I've read on this subject. So some are instances of effective campaigns used in politics, and they're kind of case study based. And the other books are all about strategy itself and the theories of which strategies work best. One of these books is Winners by Alistair Campbell, in which he details the 2 theories of strategy that are going to be central to my dissertation. These are OST and the pointer list approach. OST stands for Objective, Strategy, Tactics, and is really useful in helping us to understand the motivation behind what the speaker is saying or what the campaign is projecting. Now the O, objective, and the T, tactics, are often quite obvious, but the strategy is really what's at the heart of the campaign. So I'll give you some examples. In New Labour 1994, The objective is to win the next election. Now the strategy was modernisation. So all of the tactics need to flow from this idea of modernisation. That's why they dropped Clause 4, elect a new fresh leader, and adopt the name New Labour. Or if your objective is to do well in your dissertation presentation, then your strategy might be do something different. So your tactics could be make a video, use some fancy graphics, and occasionally break the fourth wall. As long as everything comes back to that strategy. So what I'm going to do is, across my case studies, I'm going to try to identify what the strategy was for New Labour, for David Cameron, for Keir Starmer, and then see how well their conference speeches reflect that strategy. The other theory of strategy that I found in my readings, which I'll be employing throughout my dissertation, is the pointillist approach. That's a name I gave it based on pointillist painting, because the way Alistair Campbell describes this approach is that every piece of communication is like a dot landing on a canvas, and every time someone hears it, another dot lands, to the point where you paint the perfect picture of what you're trying to put out there. It's essentially to do with repetition. He also says that just at the point where you feel you've said it too much, it's just starting to land. So throughout campaigns, throughout conference speeches, you need to keep reiterating what you stand for. And I'm going to use this in my different case studies to see how well they get their points across. So after my introduction to strategy and the different theories that I'll be using on my conference speeches, I'm then going to come to my focus on rhetoric. And I'm going to outline the history of rhetoric as a subject that was really important to the ancient Greeks all the way up to the Victorians, but has since fizzled out slightly in modern politics. The main texts that I've used to give myself an overview of rhetorical techniques are Rhetoric and Politics by James Martin, Political Linguistics, A Critical Introduction by Jan Blommet, and Political Discourse Analysis by Norman Fairclough, along with a few others that are more specific to the case studies. Finally, for the introduction, I'm going to be setting out my 3 case studies. These are New Labour 94 to 96, The Conservatives 2006 to 2009, and Labour 2019 to 2023. I'm going to be giving a bit of background to these case studies, some of which you saw in the quite dramatic intro to this presentation, and then I'm going to explain why I chose them. And the reasons are, well, 1, they each have a new leader trying to reposition a party. 2, in each case the party has been through successive election losses. And 3, the influence of the strategy on the first and the final conference speech are very important, and the rhetoric used is very different. And I think it'll be very interesting to analyse these. These are also the 3 most recent cases of leaders repositioning parties in the UK after successive losses. So now I'm going to take you through each one in a little bit more detail. I'm going to start with New Labour. I think I'll be using New Labour as something of a benchmark when it comes to strategy and rhetoric, because I believe that no matter the politics, it is a textbook example of how coherent strategy can really influence the rhetoric of conference speeches. In 1994, the Labour strategy of modernisation came through in every aspect of the conference speech. In the slogan New Labour, New Britain, they completely repositioned their party and redefined what Labour meant. The people involved in making that decision believe that the effect of this can't be overstated.
I mean, slogans both matter and they don't matter, but I sort of felt that one mattered a lot. It was the first big point of connection between Tony Blair and the public.
For me, the creation of New Labour, it was a fundamental reorientation of the way the public looked at us and in the way that we looked at ourselves.
The next case study is the Conservative Party from 2006 to 2009. And I'm going to be starting this chapter by explaining why I believe it's more difficult to pin down what their strategy was at this time than it was for New Labour. In some cases, David Cameron has described himself as the heir to Blair, and a lot of his moves suggested that the party was heading for modernisation as a strategy, just as Blair did. However, many close to Cameron at the time suggest that the strategy was in fact compassion. The Conservatives were trying to shake their reputation that they were the nasty party. Now, at the time of making this presentation, and as I'll explain when I come on to talk about my progress so far, I haven't conducted analysis of Cameron's speeches yet. However, I've read numerous books about his tenure, and I think they've helped me to understand what was happening around the time of the conference speech in 2006 and in 2009. My final case study I've called Looking Forward, and that's because it centres around Keir Starmer and his time as opposition leader. Now, I think that even though the election hasn't happened and I'm looking slightly at a moving picture, this is still a credible third case study, and I'll tell you why. Firstly, Keir Starmer's Labour Party has suffered 4 successive election losses. That's the same number that Tony Blair's party had when he became leader, and one more than David Cameron's Conservative Party had when he became leader in 2005. Secondly, Keir Starmer has faced the very difficult challenge of repositioning the party after the Corbyn era. This involved not only swinging it back from the left, but also detoxifying it for the anti-Semitism that it has been accused of. Third and finally, Keir Starmer has already given his first conference speech as leader, and has very likely given his last conference speech before the next general election. This means that he is in the same position that Cameron was in 2009 and Blair was in 1996. I therefore see Keir Starmer's Labour Party as a very credible third case study for my dissertation. Finally, I'll be moving on to my conclusion, and here I'll be evaluating my results, comparing and contrasting the results from each case study, and seeing what kind of interesting conclusions I can draw. Hopefully, I'll be able to have a go at answering my central research question of how British political leaders use the conference speech to reposition parties following election losses, and I'll be able to understand the roles of strategy and rhetoric. So a very basic breakdown of my word count. I've got 15,000 to use. I'm going to put about 2,000 into the introduction, 3,000 to each case study, and then 4,000 into the conclusion, as this is where the bulk of my evaluation will happen. So now we've spoken about structure, we can talk about my research approach. And I've had a look at the background of this topic, and what I've found is that there are lots of books on individual campaigns and the strategy and rhetoric within them. There are books on individual conference speeches and the rhetoric used. I feel satisfied that my project will be advancing this field of study. Firstly, I think using strategy as a way to understand the rhetoric of each conference speech is quite unique. Secondly, I think looking at the first and the final conference speech of each leader before the election will give me a good understanding of how the strategy changes and how the rhetoric might change, and I haven't seen that done before either. Third and finally, looking at the 3 most recent examples of political leaders repositioning their parties after successive losses, I believe I'll gain a pretty unique insight into the different strategies and rhetorical techniques that can be used in conference speeches. In addition to my secondary research into the strategy and rhetoric of each conference speech, I'll also be conducting my own primary research. Now this will take the form of a rhetorical analysis of each transcript, and here I'll be using the tools and techniques that I've learned from my readings. What I'm hoping to find as a result of my primary research is how the rhetorical techniques are affected by the overall strategy of the conference speech, and how that strategy is influenced by the repositioning of the party long term. I will also be conducting an interview with the man who was a strategic advisor to Tony Blair during his time in Number 10. This should hopefully give me a broader understanding of the subject as a whole, as well as supporting some of my findings and theories. So when you put that all together, hopefully you find that I've been making steady progress. I have a clear and consistent structure and a good understanding of what research I need to be undertaking. And hopefully my objective strategy and tactics can be just as effective as New Labour's. Thanks for listening.